standing in front of 100 relatives at what I thought was my 28th birthday celebration. My mother's voice cut through the restaurant's chatter like a blade. We gathered everyone here tonight not to celebrate Serafina, but to formally disown her from our family. The room fell silent. My father nodded grimly beside her, holding documents that would strip away my inheritance, my name from the family business. Everything. The betrayal burned deeper than any physical wound. What I discovered in the following weeks about why they chose this public humiliation would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty and reveal a web of lies that had been building for decades. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate revenge, I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below if you're ready for a wild ride filled with shocking family secrets and the sweetest karma you've ever heard. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because this story will leave you speechless. Trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Let's get started. The humiliation at Romano's restaurant was just the beginning. As I sat in my car afterward, mascara streaking down my cheeks, I couldn't understand why my parents had chosen such a cruel public method to cut me from their lives. The official reason they'd given the family was my irresponsible lifestyle choices. Apparently, my decision to pursue social work instead of joining their real estate empire was unforgivable. But something felt wrong about their explanation. My parents, Miranda and Robert Blackwell, had built their fortune through calculated moves, not emotional outbursts. This level of cruelty seemed orchestrated, planned with surgical precision. The documents they'd presented were too polished, too professionally prepared for a spur-of-the-moment decision. 3 days after my public disowning, I received an unexpected call from my cousin Marcus, who'd witnessed the entire spectacle. "Serafina, something's not right about what happened," he said, his voice trembling. "I overheard your parents talking to Uncle James in the parking lot. They mentioned something about the trust fund deadline and keeping her from finding out about the amendment." Trust fund deadline. I had no idea what he meant, but Marcus agreed to meet me at a coffee shop across town to explain what he'd heard. When we met that evening, his face was pale with worry. "Do you remember your grandmother Eleanor's will reading 5 years ago?" he asked. I nodded, recalling how confused I'd been by all the legal jargon. "Well, I was there too. And I remember the lawyer mentioning something about a clause that would transfer additional assets to you on your 28th birthday. But only if you maintained good standing with the family." The pieces began clicking into place. My 28th birthday, the public disowning, the rushed nature of the entire event. My parents hadn't acted out of disappointment or anger. They'd acted out of greed. They were trying to prevent me from accessing something that was rightfully mine. Marcus and I spent the next several hours researching everything we could find about my grandmother's estate. Eleanor Blackwell had been the family matriarch, a shrewd businesswoman who'd accumulated significant wealth through her textile business in the 1970s. She'd always been fond of me, often praising my compassionate nature and telling me I reminded her of herself when she was young. The following morning, I made an appointment with Harrison and Associates, the law firm that had handled my grandmother's estate. The receptionist initially tried to dismiss me, saying they couldn't discuss confidential client information. But when I mentioned I was Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter and that I suspected fraud related to her, the senior partner, William Harrison, agreed to see me immediately. Sitting in his oak-paneled office, Mr. Harrison's expression grew increasingly grave as I explained the events of my birthday dinner. "Miss Blackwell," he said slowly, I've been wondering when you might come to see me. Your grandmother left very specific instructions about a secondary trust that was to be activated on your 28th birthday regardless of any family disputes. My heart raced as he pulled out a thick folder from his filing cabinet. This trust contains approximately $2.7 million plus ownership stakes in 3 commercial properties your grandmother acquired independently from the family business. She was very clear that this inheritance was yours alone, with no conditions attached except reaching the age of 28. The betrayal cut even deeper now. My parents hadn't just disowned me out of spite. They'd stolen my inheritance through manipulation and lies. Mr. Harrison explained that my parents had contacted his office 6 months ago, claiming I was in financial trouble, and suggesting the trust be delayed or restructured. He'd refused their requests, but now he understood their desperation. There's something else. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice heavy with concern. Your parents submitted false documentation 3 weeks ago, claiming you'd been declared mentally incompetent and requesting guardianship over your financial affairs. They provided what appeared to be medical records and psychological evaluations, stating you were unfit to manage large sums of money. The room spun around me. Not only had they stolen my inheritance, but they'd also attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent through forged documents. This wasn't just family drama. This was criminal fraud forgery and possibly identity theft. The public disowning had been their backup plan when the forgery scheme failed to convince Mr. Harrison. As we reviewed the documents together, Mr. Harrison pointed out several red flags in the supposedly medical records. The letterhead belonged to a clinic that had been closed for 2 years. The doctor's signature was inconsistent with samples on file, and the psychological evaluation contained factual errors about my education and employment history that any legitimate examiner would never have made. Miss Blackwell, Mr. Harrison said, closing the folder, you have grounds for serious legal action against your parents. This level of fraud could result in criminal charges, not to mention civil liability for the emotional distress they've caused. I left his office with copies of all relevant documents and a referral to Rebecca Martinez, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases. The weight of betrayal was crushing, but underneath the pain, a cold fury was building. My parents had underestimated me, assuming I'd simply accept their cruelty and disappear from their lives quietly. That evening, I called Marcus to update him on what I'd discovered. His reaction was immediate and intense. Serafina, this is insane. They could go to prison for this. He paused, then added, but you know what this means, right? You have the power to expose them completely. Every relative who witnessed that humiliation needs to know the truth. As I hung up the phone, I realized Marcus was right. The public disowning had been their weapon against me, but it could also become my weapon against them. Every family member who'd sat silently while my parents destroyed my reputation deserved to know they'd been manipulated into participating in a criminal conspiracy. The next phase of my plan was beginning to form. But first, I needed to document everything carefully and build an unshakable case against them. Meeting with Rebecca Martinez the following Tuesday changed everything. Her office, located in a sleek downtown building, felt like a war room where justice was planned and executed. Rebecca, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with an impressive track record of exposing white-collar crimes, listened intently as I laid out the evidence of my parents' fraud. Serafina, what your parents have done constitutes multiple felonies, she said, spreading the documents across her conference table. We're looking at fraud, forgery, attempted financial exploitation, and conspiracy. The fact that they orchestrated a public humiliation to cover their tracks adds emotional distress and possible defamation to the mix. She paused, studying my face carefully. But before we proceed legally, I want to ask you something. Are you prepared for the nuclear option? Because once we expose this publicly and criminally, there's no going back. Your entire extended family will know the truth, but your relationship with your parents will be permanently destroyed. The question didn't require much consideration. My parents had already destroyed our relationship when they chose greed over love. I'm ready, I told her. But I want to do this strategically. They humiliated me in front of 100 relatives. I want them to face the same public accountability. Rebecca smiled grimly. Then let's build a case that's absolutely bulletproof. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked tirelessly to gather evidence. Rebecca's private investigator, David Chen, tracked down the fake medical records and discovered they'd been created using a sophisticated desktop publishing program. The metadata on the digital files revealed they'd been created on my father's personal laptop, which was registered to the family business. Meanwhile, I reached out to other family members who'd been at the birthday dinner, carefully gauging their reactions without revealing my hand. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, seemed particularly uncomfortable when I brought up the disowning. "Honey, I've been worried about you," she admitted during a coffee meeting. That whole thing felt so orchestrated and cruel. Your parents were so insistent that everyone attend, and they had those documents ready like they'd been planning it for months. Patricia's observation confirmed what I'd suspected. This hadn't been an emotional decision. It had been a calculated attack designed to maximize my humiliation while minimizing questions about their motives. But Patricia also revealed something crucial. My parents had been spreading rumors about my supposed financial irresponsibility for months leading up to the dinner, laying groundwork to make their public disowning seem justified. They told everyone you'd been gambling, that you'd asked them for money multiple times, that you were involved with dangerous people. Patricia explained, her voice filled with regret. I should have questioned it more, but they seemed so concerned about you. The systematic character assassination made my blood boil, but it also provided more evidence of premeditation. Rebecca was thrilled when I shared Patricia's information. This establishes a clear pattern of defamation designed to support their fraud, she explained. They were building a narrative to justify keeping you from your inheritance. Our breakthrough came when David discovered security footage from Romano's restaurant. The restaurant's manager, sympathetic to my situation, provided video evidence showing my parents arriving 2 hours early to set up their presentation materials and coordinate with the wait staff. The footage clearly showed them rehearsing their speech and arranging the seating to ensure maximum impact. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Rebecca had subpoenaed my parents' phone records, and the analysis revealed dozens of calls between my father and Dr. Harrison Wolfe, a disgraced psychologist who'd lost his license 3 years earlier for falsifying patient records. Cross-referencing the call times with the creation dates of the fake medical documents painted a clear picture of conspiracy. Your father paid Dr. Wolfe $5,000 to create false psychological evaluations, Rebecca revealed during our final preparation meeting. We have bank records showing the payment, and Dr. Wolfe's former assistant is willing to testify that she witnessed him creating fraudulent documents for various clients. With our evidence compiled, Rebecca filed criminal charges against my parents with the district attorney's office. The charges included fraud, forgery, conspiracy, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. The DA, impressed by the strength of our case, agreed to pursue the matter aggressively. But I wasn't satisfied with just legal action. I wanted the same public exposure my parents had subjected me to. Rebecca helped me craft a detailed letter explaining the entire situation, complete with copies of key evidence. The letter went to every family member who'd attended my birthday dinner, plus several family friends and business associates. The letter began, "Dear family, 3 weeks ago, you witnessed what my parents claimed was a necessary intervention to address my irresponsible behavior. I'm writing to inform you that you were unknowingly participants in a criminal conspiracy designed to steal my inheritance through fraud and character assassination." The response was immediate and explosive. My phone rang constantly as family members called to express their shock, anger, and support. Uncle James, who'd initially seemed supportive of my parents' decision, left a voicemail that was both apologetic and furious. "Serafina, I can't believe I was manipulated into supporting this. Your parents made me complicit in something terrible, and I'll never forgive them for that." Even more satisfying was hearing from relatives who'd had their own suspicions. My cousin Sarah called to tell me she'd found my parents' behavior suspicious from the beginning. They were too prepared, too rehearsed. Real parents dealing with a crisis don't have professional presentations ready. "I'm so sorry I didn't speak up that night." The family's reaction created a cascade effect that my parents couldn't control. Their carefully constructed narrative crumbled as more relatives came forward with questions about inconsistencies they'd noticed. Some revealed that my parents had approached them individually before the dinner, asking them to support their decision and sharing increasingly dramatic stories about my supposed problems. The most devastating blow came when my grandmother's sister, Aunt Dorothy, called with information that changed everything. "Serafina, dear, your parents approached me 6 months ago, asking about Eleanor's will," she explained, her voice shaking with anger. "They claimed you were in financial trouble and suggested that Eleanor would have wanted the inheritance delayed until you got help. I told them Eleanor specifically chose 28 as your inheritance age because she believed people needed time to mature, but that she trusted you completely." Aunt Dorothy's revelation proved that my parents had been planning this scheme for at least 6 months, systematically approaching family members to plant seeds of doubt about my character, while secretly attempting to manipulate the legal system. Within 72 hours of sending the letters, my parents' world began collapsing. 3 major clients of their real estate business canceled contracts, citing concerns about working with people facing criminal charges. The local newspaper picked up the story after one of our family friends, a prominent businessman, spoke publicly about the case. The article, titled, "Local Real Estate Moguls Face Fraud Charges in Inheritance Scheme," detailed the accusations and included quotes from several family members expressing their shock and disappointment. The reporter had done her homework, uncovering additional questionable business practices that suggested this wasn't my parents' first venture into fraud. My mother called me for the first time since the birthday dinner, her voice a mixture of rage and desperation. "Serafina, you're destroying our family business, our reputation, everything we've worked for. Can't we work this out privately?" The irony was breathtaking. She was asking for the privacy and discretion she'd denied me when she chose public humiliation as her weapon. "Mom," I replied calmly, "you made this public when you decided to destroy my reputation in front of 100 relatives. I'm simply making sure they know the truth about what they witnessed." She hung up without another word, but the damage was already done. The first phase of my revenge was complete. The truth was exposed, and my parents were facing the same public judgment they'd inflicted on me. But this was just the beginning of their downfall. The criminal charges against my parents created ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. Within a week of the story breaking, I began receiving calls from people I'd never expected. Former employees of my parents' business, distant relatives, and even competitors who'd suspected unethical behavior for years. Each conversation revealed new layers of deception that went far beyond my inheritance fraud. Sarah Blackwood, my parents' former office manager who'd been mysteriously fired 6 months earlier, reached out with information that made my blood run cold. Serafina, I've been waiting for someone to finally challenge your parents, she said during our meeting at a quiet cafe downtown. They didn't just forge documents for your inheritance case. They've been systematically defrauding clients, manipulating property valuations, and skimming money from escrow accounts for at least 3 years. Sarah's revelations transformed my personal revenge into something much larger. She provided detailed records she'd secretly copied before being terminated, showing a pattern of criminal behavior that affected dozens of families. Property buyers had been overcharged. Sellers had been underpaid, and loan applications had been falsified to increase commission rates. The reason they fired me was because I started asking questions about discrepancies in the books. Sarah explained, her hands trembling as she showed me spreadsheets detailing the fraud. When I confronted your father about missing escrow funds, he accused me of stealing and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't resign immediately. This information was a game changer. Rebecca Martinez was ecstatic when I shared Sarah's evidence with her. Serafina, this transforms your case from a family dispute into a major white-collar crime investigation. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit will definitely want to get involved now. As word spread about my parents' expanding legal troubles, more allies emerged. Marcus, who'd been supporting me since the beginning, introduced me to his girlfriend, Elena Rodriguez, an investigative journalist for the city's largest newspaper. Elena saw the potential for a major exposé about corruption in the real estate industry and offered to help uncover additional evidence. Your parents aren't operating in a vacuum, Elena explained during our first meeting. If they're running this level of fraud, they have to have accomplices. Lawyers, appraisers, maybe even bank officials who are looking the other way. Let me dig into their business network and see what connections I can find. Elena's investigation skills proved invaluable. Within 2 weeks, she'd identified a web of corruption involving my parents' preferred appraiser, Thomas Mitchell, who'd been consistently overvaluing properties to inflate commissions. She also discovered that my parents had a suspiciously close relationship with a loan officer at First National Bank who'd approved questionable mortgages for their clients. The most shocking discovery came when Elena found evidence that my parents had been operating what amounted to a money laundering scheme through their business. They'd been purchasing properties with cash from unknown sources, quickly renovating and flipping them, then using the clean profits to fund their lavish lifestyle and business expansion. Serafina, your parents aren't just thieves, Elena told me after completing her initial investigation. They're potentially connected to organized crime. The cash sources for their property purchases don't match their legitimate income, and the speed of their transactions suggests they're washing money for other people. This revelation terrified and exhilarated me simultaneously. My quest for justice was uncovering crimes that could put my parents in federal prison for decades. But it also meant I was potentially exposing myself to danger from whatever criminal network they were involved with. My growing alliance expanded when Dr. Margaret Stevens, a forensic accountant, recommended by Rebecca, joined our team. Dr. Stevens specialized in unraveling complex financial fraud, and her analysis of my parents' business records revealed the true scope of their criminal enterprise. In my 20-year career, I've rarely seen such systematic and sophisticated fraud, Dr. Stevens reported after weeks of analysis. Your parents have stolen approximately $8.4 million through various schemes over the past 5 years. The inheritance fraud was actually one of their smaller operations. The magnitude of the theft was staggering. Dr. Stevens had identified 47 families who'd been victimized by my parents' schemes, including elderly couples who'd lost their retirement savings and young families who'd been tricked into predatory loans. The human cost of their greed was overwhelming. As our investigation progressed, I realized I needed to reach out to the victims. With Elena's help, I organized a meeting for families who'd been defrauded by my parents. The gathering, held in a community center conference room, brought together 38 people representing 22 families. The stories I heard that evening broke my heart and strengthened my resolve. Margaret Wells, a 73-year-old widow, explained how my parents had convinced her to sell her family home for far below market value, while secretly arranging for a buyer who paid twice what she received. The difference had gone directly into my parents' pockets.
I trusted them because they were recommended by my church, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face.
They told me the market was soft, and I should be grateful for any offer. I found out later they sold my house the same day for $300,000 more than they paid me. Similar stories emerged throughout the evening. Young couples who'd been steered toward predatory loans that benefited my parents through kickbacks. Elderly investors who'd been convinced to put their life savings into fake real estate investment trusts. Families who'd lost their homes because my parents had stolen money from escrow accounts. By the end of the meeting, we'd formed what Elena dubbed the Accountability Coalition. Each victim agreed to cooperate with the criminal investigation and pursue civil litigation to recover their losses. The coalition gave us collective power that individual victims couldn't have achieved alone. The coalition's formation sent shockwaves through my parents' world. Their lawyers, sensing the mounting evidence against them, began reaching out to Rebecca with plea bargain offers. But we weren't interested in deals. We wanted full accountability and maximum consequences for their crimes. The pressure intensified when Elena published her first article about the coalition. Titled, "Victims Unite Against Alleged Real Estate Fraud Ring." The piece included interviews with several families and detailed documentation of the schemes. The article generated enormous public attention and prompted additional victims to come forward. My parents' response was predictably desperate. They hired a crisis management firm and attempted to portray themselves as successful business people being targeted by a vindictive daughter and opportunistic accusers. They held a press conference where my father claimed I was mentally unstable and being manipulated by lawyers seeking a payday. The press conference backfired spectacularly. Elena had prepared for this possibility and arranged for 3 coalition members to attend with questions about specific fraudulent transactions. When my father couldn't explain why clients had received less money than property records showed his credibility crumbled on live television. But their most desperate move was yet to come. Unknown to me at the time, my parents were already planning to sacrifice someone close to our investigation to save themselves. The betrayal, when it came, would test my faith in the alliance we'd built and nearly derail everything we'd worked for. As we prepared for the next phase of our fight, I felt stronger than I'd ever been in my life. The scared, humiliated woman who'd been publicly disowned had transformed into someone who could stand up to powerful criminals and protect vulnerable people. but I was about to learn that even the strongest alliances can hide dangerous weaknesses. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as I was reviewing witness statements for the criminal trial. Marcus's voice was strained and urgent. "Serafina, we have a problem. I just found out something about Elena that changes everything." Marcus's words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean about Elena?" I asked, though the tremor in my voice revealed I already suspected something terrible was coming. "I've been doing some research on our team members just to be safe." Marcus explained, his voice heavy with regret. "Elena Rodriguez isn't who she claims to be. Her real name is Elena Martinez Rodriguez, and she's Robert Blackwell's niece, your father's brother's daughter. She's been feeding information back to your parents this entire time." The phone slipped from my hand as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over me. Elena, who'd become one of my closest allies, who'd helped expose the coalition victims, who'd written articles supporting our cause. She was family.
She was a spy planted directly in the heart of our operation.
I called Rebecca immediately, my voice shaking with rage and fear. "Rebecca, we've been compromised. Elena has been reporting everything back to my parents. They know our entire strategy, our evidence, our witness list, everything." Rebecca's response was swift and professional, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "Serafina, stay calm. This is serious, but it's not necessarily fatal to our case. We need to meet immediately to assess what information she had access to and how to minimize the damage." The emergency meeting that evening included Marcus, Rebecca, Dr. Stevens, and Sarah. As we reviewed Elena's involvement in our investigation, the scope of her betrayal became clear. She'd had access to witness statements, financial analysis, and our legal strategy. Worse, she'd been present when we'd planned our approach to several key pieces of evidence. She knows about the FBI investigation timeline. Dr. Stevens reported grimly. She was there when we discussed which banks we'd be subpoenaing and which witnesses we'd be calling first. Your parents have had weeks to prepare countermeasures. The betrayal cut deeper than my parents' original fraud. Elena had looked me in the eyes while I'd shared my pain about family betrayal, had comforted me during difficult moments, had pretended to care about the coalition victims while secretly working to protect their abusers. Sarah was particularly devastated because she'd shared sensitive information about my parents' business practices with Elena. She knew exactly what questions to ask to get me to reveal the most damaging evidence. Sarah realized. She played me perfectly. But the worst revelation came when Marcus showed us what else he'd discovered about Elena. "She's not just reporting to your parents," he said, spreading documents across the table. "She's been coordinating with their crisis management firm to plant false stories about you and the coalition members. 3 articles in competing newspapers questioning your mental stability and suggesting the coalition is motivated by greed. She fed those reporters the angles they used." The systematic nature of Elena's deception was breathtaking. While publicly supporting our cause, she'd been privately orchestrating a character assassination campaign designed to undermine our credibility. The fake mental health narrative my parents had tried to establish through forged documents was being reinforced through seemingly independent media coverage. Rebecca's analysis of the situation was sobering. "Elena's betrayal has compromised our prosecution strategy, but it's also revealed something important about your parents' desperation. They wouldn't have risked placing a family member undercover unless they were terrified of what we might uncover." Over the next 48 hours, the full impact of Elena's betrayal became apparent. 3 coalition members received threatening phone calls suggesting they withdraw their cooperation or face exposure of embarrassing personal information. 2 key witnesses suddenly became unavailable, claiming family emergencies that required them to leave the state. Most damaging was the discovery that Elena had been secretly recording our meetings. When Rebecca's office was swept for surveillance devices, they found a sophisticated recording system hidden in Elena's briefcase that had captured weeks of privileged attorney-client communications. The recordings threatened to derail our entire case. Not only had Elena captured our legal strategy, but she'd also recorded coalition members sharing personal information about their financial situations and family problems. This information was already being weaponized against them through anonymous harassment campaigns. My parents' counterattack was swift and vicious. They filed a motion claiming that I was leading a criminal conspiracy to extort money from them through false accusations. Elena's recordings were submitted as evidence edited to make our legitimate investigations sound like a vindictive scheme for personal gain. The motion included affidavits from 3 people claiming I'd approached them with offers to split any settlement money in exchange for making false accusations against my parents. The affidavits were obviously fabricated, but they created enough doubt to slow down the criminal investigation. Even worse, Elena published an article titled, "The Dark Side of Victim Advocacy: When Justice Becomes Revenge," in which she portrayed herself as a journalist who'd uncovered a conspiracy led by an unstable woman seeking to destroy her parents' lives. The article painted me as manipulative and dangerous while positioning my parents as victims of a sophisticated frame-up. The article was devastating because Elena's previous reporting had established her credibility on the story. Readers who'd followed her coverage assumed this new revelation was based on the same thorough investigation that had exposed the original fraud. The narrative shift from brave daughter exposes criminal parents to unstable woman orchestrates revenge scheme happened almost overnight. Coalition members began wavering in their support. Margaret Wells, the elderly widow whose story had been particularly compelling, called to say she was reconsidering her involvement. "Serafina, I don't know what to believe anymore," she said, her voice filled with confusion and fear. "If this reporter who is helping you is now saying you've been lying about everything, maybe I should just walk away." The defection of coalition members created a cascade effect. As some victims withdrew their cooperation, others questioned whether they'd been manipulated into false accusations. My parents' legal team seized on this uncertainty, filing additional motions claiming that witness intimidation and coercion had tainted the entire investigation. Dr. Stevens delivered perhaps the most devastating news during an emergency meeting on Friday evening. "Serafina Elena's betrayal has done more than compromise our legal strategy," she reported grimly. "She's been feeding your parents information about our financial analysis, allowing them to move money and hide assets before we can freeze them. They've transferred approximately $4.2 million to offshore accounts in the past 3 weeks. The realization that my parents had been using Elena's intelligence to hide their stolen money was crushing. While we'd been building our case, they'd been systematically protecting their criminal profits from recovery. The victims we were fighting for might never see their money again. Marcus tried to maintain optimism, but even he was shaken by the scope of Elena's betrayal. "We still have solid evidence of the original crimes," he reminded us. "Elena can't change the fact that they forged documents and stole your inheritance. We can rebuild from this." But I could see the doubt in everyone's eyes. Elena's betrayal had done more than compromise our investigation. It had shattered our confidence in our ability to trust anyone. If someone so central to our team could be working for the enemy, how could we be sure there weren't other spies among us? The week ended with my parents' lawyers demanding a meeting to discuss resolving this unfortunate family dispute through private mediation. They were feeling confident enough to try negotiating from a position of strength, believing Elena's intelligence had given them an insurmountable advantage. Rebecca advised against any meeting, but I was beginning to wonder if we had any choice. Our case was compromised, our witnesses were scattered, and our evidence was tainted by the betrayal. For the first time since beginning this fight, I felt the crushing weight of potential defeat. But as I sat in my apartment that Sunday evening staring at the city lights through my window, something Elena had said during one of our early meetings came back to me. She'd mentioned that successful investigations always had backup plans and redundant evidence sources. At the time, I'd thought she was being thorough. Now I realized she might have inadvertently given me the key to recovering from her own betrayal. Elena didn't know about every piece of evidence we'd gathered because some of our most crucial discoveries had happened after her involvement began. More importantly, she didn't know about the new ally I was about to gain. Someone whose connection to my parents' crimes would provide the breakthrough we desperately needed. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source imaginable. On Monday morning, as I was contemplating whether our case could survive Elena's betrayal, I received a call from someone who would change everything. Detective Amanda Foster from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Miss Blackwell, I've been following your case through the local prosecutor's office, Detective Foster explained. I'm calling because your parents' names have come up in connection with a much larger investigation we've been conducting for the past 18 months. We'd like to meet with you immediately. The FBI meeting took place in a secure conference room downtown. Detective Foster, accompanied by Agent Michael Torres from the Organized Crime Task Force, spread out files that dwarfed our own investigation. What they revealed made my parents' fraud against me look like a minor detail in a massive criminal enterprise. Your parents have been laundering money for the Castellano crime family, Detective Foster explained, showing me surveillance photos of my father meeting with known criminals. We've been building a RICO case against the entire organization, and your parents' real estate business has been a crucial component of their money-washing operation. Agent Torres added context that made my blood run cold. The inheritance fraud against you was actually a desperate attempt to access clean money quickly. The Castellanos had been pressuring your parents to accelerate their laundering operations, but legitimate real estate transactions take time. Your grandmother's trust fund represented fast cash they could steal and inject into their system. The FBI's evidence was overwhelming and completely independent of anything Elena could have compromised. They had surveillance footage, wiretapped conversations, financial records obtained through federal warrants, and testimony from informants within the crime family. My parents weren't just thieves. They were integral members of a criminal organization. We've been waiting for the right moment to move on the entire network, Detective Foster continued. Your civil case and the local criminal charges have forced our timeline, but we're ready to coordinate with your legal team if you're willing to cooperate. Rebecca was stunned when I brought her to a follow-up FBI meeting that afternoon. The federal agents had evidence that completely bypassed Elena's betrayal and established guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. More importantly, they had resources and authority that could freeze assets, compel testimony, and penetrate the criminal network's defenses. This changes everything, Rebecca told me afterward. Federal RICO charges carry mandatory minimum sentences. Your parents can't negotiate their way out of this, and Elena's sabotage becomes irrelevant when we have federal surveillance evidence. But the FBI brought more than just evidence. They brought a new ally whose testimony would prove devastating to my parents' defense. Maria Santos, a former Castellano organization bookkeeper who'd been cooperating with the FBI for 6 months, had detailed knowledge of my parents' role in the money laundering operation. Maria's story was harrowing. She'd been forced to work for the criminals after they threatened her family, but she'd secretly documented their activities for years before finally contacting the FBI. Her records showed that my parents had processed over $15 million in illegal funds through fake real estate transactions. Your father was proud of how clever his system was. Maria told me during a protected witness interview. He would brag about using legitimate business transactions to clean dirty money while skimming profits for himself. He called it the perfect crime, because even if some transactions were questioned, they looked like normal real estate deals. Maria's testimony filled in crucial gaps in our understanding of my parents' crimes. The coalition victims hadn't been random targets. They'd been selected because their situations made them perfect cover for money laundering operations. Elderly sellers who were eager to close quickly young buyers who wouldn't question unusual terms, and distressed property owners who needed fast cash had all been exploited to facilitate criminal transactions. Most importantly, Maria had evidence that directly contradicted Elena's narrative about my mental state and motivations. Your father specifically told me that his daughter was getting too close to the truth about their business, Maria revealed. He said they had to discredit you publicly before you figured out what they were really doing. This statement, recorded during an FBI surveillance operation 6 weeks before my birthday dinner, proved that my parents' public disowning had been premeditated and motivated by fear of exposure rather than concern about my behavior. Elena's portrayal of me as an unstable daughter seeking revenge crumbled in the face of federal evidence showing I'd been targeted for elimination as a threat. The FBI's involvement also brought technological resources that revealed additional evidence Elena couldn't have known about. Digital forensics specialists recovered deleted files from my parents' computers, showing detailed planning for the inheritance fraud, including practice scripts for the birthday dinner confrontation, and research into legal methods for declaring me incompetent. Dr. Stevens, working now with FBI financial analysts, uncovered the full scope of assets my parents had hidden through the money laundering operation. Beyond the $4.2 million Elena had helped them move offshore, they'd accumulated an additional $8 million in properties, investments and accounts held under false names, and shell companies. The discovery of hidden assets was crucial for coalition members who'd feared they'd never recover their losses. Federal asset forfeiture laws would allow victims to be compensated from my parents' criminal proceeds, providing hope for families who'd been devastated by the fraud. Agent Torres also brought news that vindicated my decision to pursue public justice rather than private settlement. Miss Blackwell, if you'd accepted any private deal with your parents, you would have been accepting money stolen from other victims and potentially become an unwitting participant in money laundering. Your refusal to settle privately prevented you from being compromised. The FBI's timeline for action was aggressive. They planned to execute simultaneous raids on my parents' home business and known associates within 2 weeks. The local prosecutor would coordinate the inheritance fraud charges with federal RICO charges, creating a comprehensive case that covered all aspects of their criminal enterprise. Elena's betrayal, which had seemed so devastating just days earlier, now appeared almost irrelevant. Her intelligence had helped my parents move some money and intimidate some witnesses, but she'd been completely unaware of the federal investigation that would ultimately destroy them. Her parents had sent her to spy on a local case while remaining oblivious to the much larger net closing around them. Rebecca filed new motions incorporating the FBI evidence and requesting that Elena's compromised recordings be excluded from consideration. Federal surveillance evidence showing premeditation and criminal conspiracy rendered her edited recordings meaningless as evidence of my supposed vindictive motivations. The coalition, initially shattered by Elena's betrayal, began reforming around the stronger foundation of federal protection and guaranteed asset recovery. Margaret Wells called to apologize for doubting me and expressed amazement at the scope of crimes that had been uncovered. Serafina, I thought we were dealing with dishonest business people, not organized criminals. Thank you for not giving up when things looked hopeless. As the FBI prepared for their coordinated takedown, I reflected on how much had changed since that horrible birthday dinner just 2 months earlier. What had begun as a quest for personal justice had evolved into a federal investigation that would dismantle an entire criminal network and provide justice for dozens of victims. Elena's betrayal had taught me that even family members could be enemies. But Maria's courage in cooperating with authorities despite personal danger showed me that allies could emerge from the most unexpected places. The true strength of our cause hadn't been in any individual relationship, but in the objective truth that could withstand any attempt at manipulation or sabotage. My parents had underestimated me from the beginning, assuming that public humiliation would silence me permanently. They'd never imagined that their cruelty would set in motion an investigation that would expose their entire criminal empire and bring federal law enforcement down on their heads. The final phase of our battle was about to begin, and this time my parents wouldn't have any advance warning or opportunity for sabotage. Elena's intelligence network worked both ways, and she had no idea that federal agents were about to close the trap she'd helped her family walk into. The federal raids began at dawn on a crisp Thursday morning in November. I watched from a distance as FBI agents simultaneously struck my parents' home, their business office, and 6 other locations connected to their criminal network. The sight of my father being led away in handcuffs while news cameras rolled was both satisfying and surreal. The same man who'd publicly humiliated me 6 months earlier was now facing the ultimate public accountability. The raids yielded even more evidence than the FBI had anticipated. Hidden safes contained cash burner phones with incriminating communications and detailed records of money laundering operations dating back 7 years. My mother's personal computer revealed email communications with Elena coordinating the sabotage of our investigation, providing federal prosecutors with additional charges of obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Elena herself was arrested 3 hours after the raids began, charged with conspiracy obstruction of justice and aiding a criminal enterprise. The shock on her face as federal agents read her rights was captured by news cameras, creating the perfect visual representation of how thoroughly my parents' plans had backfired. Their planted spy had become evidence of their desperation and criminal intent. The arraignment hearing drew massive media attention. My parents, once prominent members of the business community, stood before a federal judge, facing charges that carried potential life sentences. The inheritance fraud that had started everything was now the least serious of dozens of federal felonies they faced. Judge Patricia Williams denied bail after prosecutors argued that my parents posed significant flight risks and had already demonstrated willingness to hide assets offshore. The same people who'd portrayed themselves as pillars of the community were deemed too dangerous to release pending trial. The coalition members attended the hearing en masse, creating a powerful visual statement about the scope of their crimes. Margaret Wells, who'd initially wavered after Elena's betrayal, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. These people didn't just steal money, they stole our trust, our security, and our faith in the system. Seeing them in custody today gives us hope that justice still exists. The asset forfeiture process moved quickly once federal authorities took control. Within 3 weeks, the FBI had frozen over $12 million in accounts, properties, and investments connected to my parents' criminal enterprise. Victim compensation hearings were scheduled to begin distributing these funds to families who'd been defrauded. My own inheritance. The $2.7 million that had triggered this entire sequence of events was released to me without challenge once the criminal charges were filed. But the money felt less important now than the relationships I'd built and the justice we'd achieved together. The trial process stretched over 8 months, but the outcome was never in doubt given the overwhelming evidence. My parents eventually accepted plea agreements to avoid life sentences, but they still received 25 and 23-year federal prison terms, respectively. Elena received 8 years for her role in the conspiracy, and Dr. Wolf, the disgraced psychologist who'd created the fake evaluations, received 5 years. The Castellano crime family investigation resulted in 43 arrests and completely dismantled their money laundering operations in our region. Federal authorities estimated that our case had prevented over $50 million in additional money laundering and protected countless future victims from fraud. The personal transformation I experienced throughout this ordeal was perhaps more valuable than any financial recovery. The scared, humiliated woman who'd been publicly disowned had evolved into someone capable of standing up to organized crime and protecting vulnerable people. I'd learned that real family isn't defined by blood relations, but by the people who stand with you when facing adversity. Marcus remained my closest friend throughout the ordeal, and beyond, proving that some family bonds transcend genetics. His loyalty during my darkest moments showed me what unconditional support really means. We've continued working together on victim advocacy projects, helping other families navigate similar betrayals and crimes. Rebecca Martinez became more than just my lawyer. She became a mentor who taught me that justice requires both courage and strategy. Her guidance helped me understand that seeking accountability isn't about revenge, but about preventing future harm and creating consequences for harmful behavior. Dr. Stevens and I developed a friendship based on our shared commitment to exposing financial crimes. She's helped me establish a nonprofit organization that provides forensic accounting services to families who suspect they're being defrauded by relatives or business partners. Most surprisingly, Maria Santos and I formed a deep bond based on our shared experience of family betrayal and finding the courage to seek justice despite personal costs. Her bravery in cooperating with federal authorities inspired me to become an advocate for other women trapped in abusive situations by family obligations or criminal pressure. The coalition members became an extended chosen family, united by our shared experience of victimization and collective empowerment. We continue meeting monthly, both to support each other and to identify other potential fraud victims in our community. Margaret Wells has become like a grandmother to me, providing wisdom and perspective that my biological family never offered. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the prevention of future crimes. The dismantling of the money laundering network protected countless potential victims from becoming involved in criminal schemes they wouldn't have understood. The prosecution sent a clear message that financial fraud disguised as legitimate business would face serious federal consequences. The real estate fraud prevention program we established in cooperation with local authorities has already identified and stopped several attempted schemes targeting elderly homeowners. Our experience taught us to recognize the warning signs of systematic fraud and how to protect vulnerable populations from sophisticated criminals. My relationship with extended family members has been permanently changed, but mostly for the better. Relatives who supported my parents' public humiliation have had to confront their own complicity in enabling criminal behavior. Many have apologized and worked to make amends, while others have maintained distance out of shame or continued misplaced loyalty. Aunt Patricia, who'd been one of my early allies, has become a close confidant who helps me navigate the complex emotions of family destruction and rebuilding. She's often said that watching me fight for justice inspired her to be more courageous in her own life decisions. The money recovered through asset forfeiture allowed all coalition members to be fully compensated for their losses, with additional funds supporting ongoing fraud prevention efforts. But the real victory was proving that organized criminal enterprises can be defeated when victims unite and authorities take comprehensive action. Elena's betrayal taught me valuable lessons about trust and verification that have served me well in subsequent relationships and professional endeavors. I learned to value loyalty demonstrated through actions rather than words, and to build multiple independent sources of support rather than relying on any single relationship. The psychological healing process took longer than the legal resolution, but working with a therapist who specialized in family trauma helped me process the complex emotions of being betrayed by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. I learned that family dysfunction doesn't reflect personal inadequacy, but rather the moral failures of those who choose greed and control over love and honesty. Today, 3 years after that devastating birthday dinner, I can honestly say that being disowned was the best thing that ever happened to me. It freed me from a toxic family system built on lies and exploitation, allowing me to build authentic relationships based on shared values, rather than genetic obligation. The nonprofit organization I founded, Truth and Accountability in Family Finance, has helped over 200 families investigate suspected fraud and recover millions of dollars in stolen assets. The work is emotionally challenging but deeply rewarding, allowing me to transform my painful experience into protection for others facing similar betrayals. Looking back, I realized that my parents' cruelty actually revealed their desperation and weakness rather than their power over me. Their need to humiliate me publicly demonstrated how threatened they were by my potential to expose their crimes. What they intended as my destruction became the catalyst for their downfall and my empowerment. The birthday dinner that was supposed to end my family story actually began a much better chapter filled with chosen family meaningful work and the satisfaction of justice served. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the life you are meant to live. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal that completely changed your perspective on blood versus chosen family? I'm curious about your stories of finding justice after being wronged by people you trusted. Drop a comment below sharing your experience. Did karma eventually catch up with the people who hurt you? Or are you still waiting for justice to be served? Your stories matter and help others feel less alone in their struggles. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people find this story of justice and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of people who refuse to stay silent when faced with family betrayal and corruption. Share this with someone who needs to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for protecting yourself and others from harmful people. Thank you for taking this journey with me and for believing that truth and justice are worth fighting for even when the battle feels impossible. Remember that sometimes the family that disowns you is doing you the biggest favor of your life by showing you who they really are. Wishing you the courage to seek truth, demand accountability, and build the family you deserve, rather than accepting the one that fails you.